Ken Phillips is from the Independent Contractors Association, and I'm going to start with him. Welcome, Ken.
Just so you know, I'm talking on tax and trade, so you're getting both of it all at once. And Independent Contractors Australia, we were formed about 18 years ago. We're a volunteer advocacy group. I'm not paid. I lie. I'm paid $1 a month to do what we do. There are 2.1 million self-employed people in Australia. That's close around about 18% of the workforce. And if you take the people that they employ, which is roughly 5 million, you've got about 55% of the workforce. Our argument to economists, if you don't get your settings right for that sector of the workforce, you don't get anything right, basically, in the economy. My paper, by the way, is just on the app, which I've put up there. And what I'm going to do is tell you two stories. So we advocate and work to defend the right of people to be self-employed. It's a basic economic right, and if it's taken away from you, well, you lose that core freedom. So two stories. Let me take you back to 2012, the Australian Labor Party in government, and they decide that truckies, so the first story is all about truckies, long-haul truckies. So they decide that the truckies are taking drugs, overloading the trucks and speeding because they're not paid enough. So the problem here is that the rates for drivers is causing them to crash their trucks, and so therefore it's not safe. So they bring in a law called the Road Safety Remuneration Act, and they create a tribunal called the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal. And so this tribunal is supposed to have a look at safe rates. How do we make sure that we've got rates in the community that for truckies that people have to pay to make sure that they all drive safely? So they waffle on for about a few years and a whole lot of conflabs, and so you've got commissioners, so it's a de facto industrial relations commission, more closely referred to as a Mickey Mouse court. So they then do all of this sort of stuff for quite a while, do analysis and so forth, and come to just before Christmas 2015, make their first order. So they put out an order that says that this is what has to be paid to owner drivers. Now understand that the trucking industry is broadly split into two areas. There are companies that have employees, and they are the large multinational companies, so you've got Toll, Linfox, etc., etc. They all have very cosy relationships with the Transport Workers Union, and then you've got all the independents out there, all the small guys all over the place, small guys and gals. One truck they own themselves, up to the hock and so forth, and providing an extremely competitive arrangement, and extremely competitive against the major trucking companies. And so these rates that were then required increase the rate that owner drivers must be paid, so you get fined if you don't pay them that amount, and increase it to such an enormous extent that it immediately meant 50,000 owner drivers in Australia doing long-haul trucking were all out of business. So this arrangement came in place in just before Christmas. All of a sudden there was a great hullabaloo. When it started to dawn on the truckies just what was going on, people started losing their contracts straight away, and it wasn't to come in until April the 4th of 2016. So there was a great eruption that occurred, and a number of you might remember that. So we became involved. I'd been involved back when they were putting the act together. We put submissions in against it, saying this is the sort of thing that would happen. And so then the industry associations that were involved in all of this started appealing against it. And what they did is they put in applications into the federal court arguing that the RSRT, the tribunal, had misunderstood the act and hadn't applied the act properly and went through and all that sort of palaver that went on. Got nowhere, absolutely nowhere, because they were arguing the case from within the perspective of the act. So we were heavily involved, not in all of that sort of stuff, because that's not what we do, but we were in the press and doing all this sort of stuff. And on my board, I've got a volunteer. One of my volunteers is a lawyer. He's been a lawyer for about 2 years. He's in his late 60s, been a very experienced businessman, and decided to become a lawyer because he was a bit bored. So I was sitting down with him one day and I said, look, this just doesn't make sense. This whole thing doesn't make sense. Here you've got, it's quite legal for price setting of employment contracts. It doesn't make sense that the Commonwealth has the capacity to price fix commercial contracts. It just doesn't make sense. So we're sitting there chatting about it, we said, let's take a constitutional challenge to the whole thing, right? So here's me and him, 2 years he's been a lawyer. We thought, right, bang, we're going to do it. So we announced it to the press. And so all of a sudden I'm on TV, I'm on radio. We had not a brass razoo, not a cent. Then with all the publicity that went on, then I had a lawyer fall out of heaven, constitutional lawyer. He came in and said, I want to help you. I said, oh, great. So we were preparing to run a constitutional challenge based on the fact that the Commonwealth doesn't have the power to price fix commercial contracts. He said, no. Better one, interstate trade, freedom of interstate trade. So we started running the interstate trade argument. Good. Great flurry of activity. So what do we have to do? We put up on our website, we need money. 2 weeks, 25 grand we pulled in, right? 2 weeks, we had about 200 people give us their stories. I'm on the phone to all of them because we have to get the affidavits together. So I'm on the phone to all of them, trying to get their stories. Speaking to some guy out somewhere between the middle of between Perth and Brisbane. He does the Perth-Brisbane run, right? He's out there, tells me his story. He's stuck. He can't pay for the petrol to get home to Perth because the contract's been cancelled on him. He's sitting out the middle there somewhere, and we sort of say, okay, well, look, email me. So I thought, oh, mate, haven't got an email out here. I'll have to try the local pub. So I had to get into the local pub, see if we get emails done. So here we've got this flurry of activity, trying to pull together affidavits. So in the end, out of all of that, we pulled together about 40 stories that we could run with. We wound up in the end with about 10 affidavits. These have all got to be hand-signed. I'm getting people in the bush somewhere out of WA to somehow or other get us an original copy. We had 3 days to get it into the High Court. Flurry of activity. 2 weeks, and we're in front of the Chief Justice of Australia. From the time we decided to launch the action to the time we're in front of the Chief Justice of Australia, 2 weeks, we raised 25 grand and I had a barrister fall out of heaven. The Chief Justice of Australia said, you have an arguable case. Thank you very much, and referred it down to the Federal Court. Why did we do this? So we didn't get a decision, but he said we had an arguable case. What we were in the business of doing, Dan Turnbull and his people have decided this is a great issue. We'll promise that after the next election that we will fix this all up. In the meantime, people were going broke. They wanted to run a political campaign to keep the thing hot. I wasn't going to let him. So I wanted to raise the heat in the kitchen. There are a whole lot of people raising the heat in the kitchen. I thought, what can we practically do? So we raised the heat in the kitchen. And we got the decision on the Friday, and by then there'd been a momentum and there was a bill to repeal the Act, and it was passed on the following Monday. So the Act was dead. So we didn't need to proceed with our constitutional challenge. I've got to tell you that one of the things that happened with that, though, and I became very involved, got to know a huge number of truckies, people on our website, all that sort of stuff. And I've got a very good friend who's a very senior figure in the Labor Party in Victoria. And he had his 50th birthday party on the Saturday after we had the High Court decision, and before the Monday. And I was going to and anyone from Melbourne will know Collingwood. Collingwood is as working class Labor as you can get. So I was going to his birthday party. I get outside the pub, and the phone rings. And the message is that we've had our first suicide. Truckie had suicided, right? And I walked into that celebration the heartbeat of Labor in Melbourne. And these are people who have just destroyed someone's life. And they're destroying the lives of large numbers of people. We're not messing around with theory here. We're messing around with people's lives. We had 3 suicides, confirmed suicides over this. We're now going through a long process of seeking to do a class action for damages. And we've got enough figures to indicate the damages will be in the order of $450 million. So that's story number 1. What we did is use the Constitution. Story number 2, Rod Douglas, 55-year-old IT contractor, been operating as a partnership all of his life, earning about $160,000 a year, in that sort of ballpark, up and down all over the place. And for years he'd been doing whatever the tax office said. If you have a partnership, you're allowed to split your income, theoretically, right? It's quite normal sort of stuff. So sometimes, since in his 30s, they'd say, look, you can split your income 50-50, sometimes 25-75, so he did whatever they said. 2006, the tax office issued a very clear statement, the tax commissioner, saying, if you're in a partnership, husband and wife partnership, you can split your income 50-50. So he was doing that until the tax office came round to 2014 and decided to change their mind. Now, under the Tax Act, current Tax Act, if you're an individual, the tax office can only go back over your tax return, can only go back 2 years. However, if the tax office form the opinion that you have committed fraud or evasion, they can go back as far as they like. So they turned round to him and formed the opinion that he had committed fraud and evasion because he had followed the tax office website notification and not sought professional advice. He put in his tax returns on his own. Issued him a $440,000 bill. He rang us, we decided to take the case on. So what did we do? I had these lawyers, one that had fallen out of heaven, believer in the Constitution. We turned around and mounted an argument that under the Constitution, the tax office cannot act on the opinion of fraud or evasion unless they have sought approval from the federal court. So they cannot issue the $440,000 unless they've gone through the federal court first. That, I know a heck of a lot about the behaviour of the tax office, that would blow up a whole lot of the behaviour of the tax office, their systemic behaviour. So we took that into the federal court. I'm pretty good at organising media stuff, exposure. We gave this hell of a run in the press. We got into court. I've got a barrister up the front and I'm sitting down the back there, and this judge, who had been the senior counsel for the tax office for 10 years, mind you, was furious, absolutely furious that we had given this media exposure. And he gave our lawyer absolute curry in court, treated him like dirt. Here I'm the layman looking at these, he's going, you know. And so what happened with that little bit of drama we had in court? And I had the media in the court. I had one of Australia's top journalists sitting in the court watching the behaviour of the judge. And what happened in the end? Tax office fell apart. There's no way they wanted this constitutional issue tested in court. They collapsed. We're terribly sorry, but we got a written statement. We made a wrong decision. Right? So they had maintained that wrong decision, that wrong analysis, for 2.5 years against this guy. And if we hadn't been able to come in and defend him, he was bankrupt. These people are playing around again with people's lives. That's what we're dealing with, not some theory, people's individual liberty, the capacity to be your own boss. Now, why do I tell the story? We didn't win either of these constitutional arguments because it never ever got as far as we needed to go. What I've discovered is that this Constitution of Australia is far more powerful than we think it is. It is a constitution modelled very heavily on the Swiss Constitution and extremely closely on the US Constitution. It almost approaches a Bill of Rights. And we on our side of politics have chosen to ignore it. And what I've discovered is it has immense power. It doesn't mean that you have to win the case. The very act of taking it on gives you a dynamic in the process of change that is really quite awesome. We've got another case that we're working on at the moment, and if we can put the whole thing together, we're going to blow a hole in an aspect of the Federation. But there's a few lawyers doing a whole lot of discussion at the moment. So my message to you today is very, very simple. I think that we have in Australia a constitution that we should be using to defend freedom. It's there, let's not ignore it.